The day my marriage officially ended started with banana bread. That's the detail that won't leave me. I was standing at the Butcher Block Island Daniel and I had picked out together at Home Depot 3 years earlier, arguing over whether we really needed the extended warranty, mashing overripe bananas into a chipped ceramic bowl. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. Mateo had left for school an hour before, dragging his red hoodie behind him like always, one sleeve half inside out. Daniel had already gone to work, or at least that's what I believed at the time. The dishwasher hummed. Sunlight hit the countertops in long, clean stripes. It was an aggressively normal Wednesday. I remember wiping flour off my hands with a dish towel and glancing at my phone because I'd missed a notification. No missed calls, no warning, just a calendar reminder about a project meeting at 2 o'clock. I slid the banana bread into the oven, set the timer for 50 minutes, and felt, this is the part that makes me ache now, completely unaware. If life were a movie, there would have been music shifting minor, some subtle cue. Instead, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of sugar browning. The first crack in that normalcy came at 1:17 p.m. Mrs. Navarro? The secretary from Hill Country Elementary sounded polite, almost cheerful. Just calling to confirm, your husband picked up Mateo early today. He said there was a family emergency. My fingers went cold around the phone. Not shaky, not dramatic, just cold. What emergency? I asked. Oh, he didn't say, ma'am. He's listed as approved for pickup. Approved. Yes, I said automatically. Thank you. I hung up and stood in the kitchen staring at the lemon-shaped sugar jar. My brain started flipping through possibilities like flashcards. Daniel's father? A car accident? Something at work? But Daniel hadn't texted, hadn't called. And Daniel was meticulous. If there were a real emergency, there would be a timeline, instructions, bullet points. I called him. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. The oven timer went off behind me, shrill and jarring. I turned it off without opening the door. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still thought I'd come back in 20 minutes, and this would make sense. The drive home from my office in North Austin to Round Rock usually takes 30 minutes with traffic. I made it in 18. Every red light felt personal, every car in front of me an obstacle. When I pulled into the driveway, the garage door was halfway open. That's when something inside me shifted from confusion to dread. Daniel never left the garage door half open. He lectured me about it. Security, insurance liability, neighborhood crime reports. I walked inside. The first thing I noticed was the echo. Sound carries differently in a half-empty room. The gray sectional couch, the one we bought during a Labor Day sale and assembled together while arguing over the instructions, was gone. The rug was still there, slightly darker where the couch used to sit. Mateo's soccer cleats were by the door, but his backpack hook on the wall was empty. I said his name out loud. Mateo? Silence. I moved down the hallway, like someone walking through a stranger's house. Our bedroom closet was missing half of Daniel's suits. His dresser drawers were open and stripped clean. Mateo's room hit hardest, his red hoodie gone, his tablet missing from the charging cable. Half the hangers in his closet spaced out like missing teeth. His dinosaur nightlight unplugged. I walked back into the kitchen because it felt like the center of the house. Like if there were answers, they'd be there. They were. On the island, weighed down by the ceramic lemon sugar jar, sat a stack of papers. The top page read, Petition for Divorce. Travis County District Court, filed 9:08 a.m. Petitioner, Daniel Navarro. Temporary custody requested pending hearing. I read the first paragraph 3 times before the words made sense. Irreconcilable differences. Best interest of the child. Emotional instability. That phrase blurred and sharpened like it was daring me to argue. I called Daniel again. This time, on the third try, he answered. Stop calling Elise, he said, voice flat. No anger, no guilt, just administrative calm. This is better for Mateo. He doesn't need all the chaos. Chaos? What chaos? I asked, but my voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. I'll have my attorney contact yours, he continued. I've already blocked you. Blocked. The line went dead. I stood there holding my phone long after the call ended. The house felt larger and smaller at the same time. Larger because it was missing pieces. Smaller because the walls felt closer. I walked over to the oven and finally opened it. The banana bread had risen perfectly. Golden top, cracked just slightly down the center. I stared at it through the heat and thought, absurdly, that I should take it out before it burned. So I did. I placed it on the cooling rack like a woman finishing a task on a checklist. Then I slid down the cabinet doors until I was sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the island, divorce papers in my lap. The lemon sugar jar tilted slightly, but didn't fall. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't an explosion. This was a plan. And I had been living inside it without ever seeing the blueprint. If you had asked me 2 years before that Wednesday whether I trusted my husband, I would have said yes without hesitation. Not the dramatic kind of trust you declare in wedding vows, but the quiet, daily kind. The kind where you don't double-check passwords or question late meetings because it simply doesn't occur to you that you should. Daniel had always presented himself as steady, predictable, responsible, and I mistook predictability for integrity. We met when I was 32 at a charity 5K around Lady Bird Lake. I hadn't even wanted to go. A coworker signed us up and wouldn't take no for an answer. I remember the humidity that morning, the way my ponytail stuck to the back of my neck. Daniel was volunteering at a hydration station, handing out little paper cups of water like he was hosting a garden party. He smiled at everyone, but when he handed me my cup, he said, "You've got this," like he meant it specifically for me. It sounds small now, but at 32, after a string of lukewarm relationships with men who were either emotionally unavailable or chronically undecided, small felt significant. Daniel didn't hesitate. He asked for my number that same day, texted that evening, called the next afternoon. There was no ambiguity, no games. He liked me, and he acted like it. He was 35 then, already an operations manager for a logistics company in San Marcos. He wore pressed shirts, even on casual Fridays. His car was clean. His credit score, he told me on our third date, was excellent. I thought that was transparency. Looking back, I realized it was branding. We dated for a year. He met my family within 3 months, called my father sir, helped my mom fix a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. My sister Camila teased me about how buttoned up he was, but even she admitted he seemed solid. Safe. That word came up a lot. Safe. We were engaged 14 months after we met, married the following spring under a sprawling live oak in Dripping Springs. The ceremony was small, twinkle lights strung between branches, my dress simple and ivory. Daniel cried during his vows just enough that it felt sincere but not messy. People commented on how composed he was. "You picked a good one," my aunt whispered during the reception. We bought our house in Round Rock 6 months later. New build. 4 bedrooms. A little patch of backyard with stiff Texas grass that never quite grew evenly. The Homeowners Association sent stern emails about trash cans and lawn edging. Mortgage, $312,000. We celebrated by eating takeout on the living room floor before our furniture arrived. I worked as a project coordinator for a renewable energy startup downtown. The job was demanding but fulfilling. Daniel insisted on handling the finances. "It just makes sense," he said. "I deal with numbers all day. You deal with people and deadlines. Let me take this off your plate." It sounded reasonable. Generous, even. So I handed over the logins, the budget spreadsheets, the long-term planning. When Mateo was born 2 years later, I felt like we'd officially crossed into the part of life that makes sense. Sleepless nights? Yes. Stress? Definitely. But purpose. Mateo had Daniel's dark hair and my stubborn chin. He cried for 6 straight weeks after he was born. Colic, the pediatrician said. Daniel moved into the guest room after night 4. "So at least one of us can function at work," he explained. I agreed, because it sounded logical. Parenthood settled into rhythm eventually. Mateo walking, then talking. Daniel attending school events with a quiet pride. He took pictures, posted them online with captions about my whole world. From the outside, we looked steady, stable, but small shifts began around the time Mateo turned 3. Daniel started staying later at the office. Houston expansion, he said. More distribution contracts. His phone, once casually left on the counter, now stayed face down. Then came the passcode. "Client confidentiality," he told me when I noticed. He opened a new savings account at a different credit union. "Higher yield," he said. "I'll add you this week." Weeks passed, then months. The joint savings dipped slowly. Nothing dramatic enough to cause a scene. From $18,900 to $16,400 to $12,700 over the course of a year. Quarterly taxes, he'd say. Unexpected expenses. I wanted to believe him. So I did. My mother-in-law, Teresa, started making more frequent visits around that time. She lived 18 minutes away in Pflugerville and treated those 18 minutes like a sacrifice. Daniel carries so much responsibility, she'd say, glancing at the kitchen counters. It's a lot for a man. The implication hung in the air, that I was somehow adding to his burden instead of sharing it. One night, while I was loading the dishwasher, I mentioned the savings again. Gently, Daniel set his beer down harder than necessary. You don't trust me? It wasn't curiosity, it was accusation. I felt heat rise in my chest. That's not what I said. But that's what you're implying. The conversation ended there, not because it was resolved, but because I retreated. I told myself marriages required compromise, that questioning him would create unnecessary tension. So instead of asking more questions, I organized the pantry, alphabetized spices, labeled storage bins. I created control in spaces that didn't argue back. If there was a moment when the foundation truly shifted, I didn't see it then. That's the hardest part to admit. There was no single event, no shattered glass. Just a series of small, reasonable explanations that stacked together formed something unstable. I thought I was married to a careful man. I didn't realize I was being carefully managed. By the time Mateo turned 5, the shift in my marriage wasn't loud enough to name, but it was constant enough to feel. It was like living next to a highway. You don't consciously hear the traffic after a while, but your body never fully relaxes. Daniel's late nights had become routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays at first, then most weekdays. Houston calls, he'd say, loosening his tie as he walked in after 9. Different time zone coordination. Houston is 1 hour ahead of Austin, but I didn't point that out. I had started swallowing small contradictions the way you swallow pills, quickly, without chewing. He guarded his phone now, not aggressively, smoothly. It was always within reach. If I walked into the room while he was texting, the screen dimmed or flipped face down. When Mateo once picked it up to play a game, Daniel took it back a little too fast. "Work stuff, buddy," he said lightly. Mateo nodded and ran off. I stood there pretending not to notice. The money was the part that kept needling at me. The joint savings account continued its quiet decline. I logged in one afternoon while Daniel was on a business trip. At least that's what he said it was. The balance sat at $9,860. A year earlier, it had been nearly double that. When he came home, I tried again. I was looking at the savings, I said carefully while chopping onions for dinner. It's lower than I expected. He didn't look up from his phone. Quarterly tax adjustments, fuel price increases, logistics margins are tight. I didn't know. I coordinated solar installation timelines and vendor contracts. I knew spreadsheets and deadlines, not freight margins, but the way he said it made me feel small for even asking. Okay, I said. That word became my shield and my surrender. Around this time, Teresa's visits increased. Always weekday afternoons, always when Daniel wasn't home. She'd bring tamales or flan and then slowly inventory my living room with her eyes. Daniel works so hard, she'd sigh. Men carry stress differently. They don't complain. The implication was clear. If Daniel seemed distant or irritated, it was because I was adding to his load. One Sunday, after Mateo spent the weekend with her, he came home unusually quiet. While I was folding laundry, he stood in the doorway of our bedroom. "Mom," he said. "Yes, baby?" Abuela says sometimes when moms get overwhelmed, dads have to make hard decisions. My hands froze mid-fold over one of Daniel's dress shirts. "What kind of decisions?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He shrugged, like where kids live. I forced a smile. "You live here. This is your home." He nodded, but his eyes held uncertainty I hadn't seen before. That night, I called Teresa. "I think Mateo might be misunderstanding something," I began carefully. "He mentioned judges deciding where kids live." There was a pause. Then her voice turned syrupy. "Oh, Elise, children say the wildest things. You know how imaginative he is." "Yes," I said. "I just wanted to clarify." "Of course," she replied. "You worry too much, I hung up feeling like I'd been gently scolded. At work, I started leaning more heavily on Rachel. She was easy to talk to, empathetic without being dramatic. We'd sit in the break room with microwave leftovers and paper plates, and I'd tell her pieces of what was happening. "He makes me feel like I'm crazy for asking about our own money," I admitted once. "That's not crazy," she said immediately. That's basic partnership. Her certainty steadied me, or so I thought. The turning point, though I didn't fully recognize it then, came on a Tuesday night in October. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, television flickering blue across his face. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Just once. A soft vibration. I don't know what made me look. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe instinct. The screen lit up with a notification from a contact saved only as R. My stomach tightened. I didn't open it. I didn't even pick up the phone. I just stood there staring at the letter like it might rearrange itself into something innocent. The next morning, Daniel left early for work. After dropping Mateo at school, I came home and stood in Daniel's office staring at his desk. I wasn't looking for proof of an affair. Not exactly. I think I was looking for something solid, something I could point to and say, "See? I'm not imagining this." Instead, I found a bank statement tucked into a manila folder beneath an old utility bill. Lone Star Credit Union. Account holder Daniel Navarro. Balance $31,504 each. I sat down in his desk chair because my knees gave out without asking permission. He had told me his annual salary was $82,000. The employer summary printed on the statement reflected deposits consistent with $96,000, $14,000 a year. 3 years. $42,000 diverted somewhere I couldn't see. The room felt airless. It wasn't just the money. It was the architecture of deception, the planning, the quiet siphoning of resources while telling me we needed to tighten spending. I thought about the times I'd skipped lunches out to save money, the way I'd compared grocery prices down to the ounce. I placed the statement back exactly where I'd found it, smoothed the folder, closed the drawer. Then I walked into the kitchen and made coffee. When Daniel came home that evening, I handed him a mug and asked about his day. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and for the first time, I felt like I was standing across from a man I did not know. Not because he had changed overnight, but because I had finally begun to see. After I found the credit union statement, something inside me split cleanly in two. There was the version of me that still packed Mateo's lunches, answered work emails, and folded laundry like nothing had shifted. And then there was the version that had seen behind the curtain and couldn't unsee it. I moved through my days like an undercover agent in my own house, careful not to tip my hand. Daniel didn't act nervous. That's what struck me most. He didn't hover over his office drawer. He didn't check whether I'd been in his space. If anything, he seemed calmer, polished, like a man who had already solved a problem I didn't yet know existed. Teresa, on the other hand, grew more visible. She started dropping by on Saturday mornings with breakfast tacos, letting herself in with the spare key Daniel had given her for emergencies. She'd sit at the island, purse placed carefully on the counter, and watch me move around the kitchen like she was assessing a performance. "You look tired, Elise," she'd say. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," I'd answer. She'd hum softly, unconvinced. The comments about Daniel intensified. He carries so much. His job, the mortgage, the future. Men internalize pressure. It was subtle, the framing. Daniel as burdened, me as fragile. One afternoon, I came home early from work because a client meeting had been canceled. Teresa's car was in the driveway. I hadn't known she was coming. I walked inside to find her and Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, voices low. They both went quiet when they saw me. "Oh," Teresa exclaimed, too brightly. "We were just talking about Mateo's school options for next year." "Without me?" I asked before I could stop myself. Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was just a quick conversation. The air felt charged, not explosive, controlled, like something rehearsed. Later that week, Mateo came home from one of Teresa's special weekends quieter than usual. He sat at the dining table drawing while I made dinner. "Mom," he said after a long pause. "Yes, baby." "Abuela says if one parent gets too emotional, judges make decisions for them." The knife slipped in my hand and nicked my finger. I barely felt it. "What do you think that means?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "I don't know. She said Daddy knows how to stay calm." There it was again. Calm. I felt anger rise. Not loud, not fiery, but cold and focused. This wasn't accidental commentary. This was narrative building. That night, I called Teresa. "I need you to stop talking to Mateo about judges or decisions," I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a long pause. "Elise," she replied softly, "if you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps you should speak to someone." Daniel has been very concerned. Concerned. About me. It was the first time I realized the storyline might already be written. The following week, Daniel suggested I take a few days off work. "You've seemed stressed," he said casually while scrolling through his phone. "Maybe step back a bit. Focus on yourself." "I'm not stressed," I replied. He looked up slowly. "You've been distracted. Emotional." The word landed hard. At work, I confided more in Rachel. I told her about the hidden account, about Teresa's comments, about the way Daniel had started describing me as overwhelmed. "That's manipulation," she said firmly. "He's setting something up." Her certainty both comforted and unsettled me. "Why would he do that?" I asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long. "To control the narrative." Control. I started noticing how often Daniel used certain phrases when talking about me to others. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard him telling a neighbor, "Elise has just been under a lot of pressure lately." At a school pickup, he told another parent, "She's had a hard time balancing everything." On the surface, those statements sounded supportive. Beneath them, they implied instability. One evening, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and saw Daniel texting rapidly. He didn't hear me at first. "I'll handle it," he typed. "Just keep reinforcing it." My breath caught. He looked up, startled, and quickly locked the screen. "Work?" Mackie said smoothly. I nodded, but something inside me hardened. The next day, I went back into his office while he was at work. This time, I wasn't looking for proof of money. I was looking for pattern. In a folder labeled Insurance, I found a draft of a parenting plan, dated 3 weeks earlier. It outlined primary residence with Daniel, structured visitation for me, language describing maternal emotional volatility. My hands shook as I read it. 3 weeks earlier. Before any formal conversation with me, before any mention of separation, I sat at his desk and felt something settle into place. The late nights, the hidden account, Teresa's commentary. The word calm repeated like a mantra. Rachel's probing questions. It wasn't chaos. It was coordination. And I had been the only one in the room who didn't know the meeting had started. The morning after I found the draft parenting plan in Daniel's office, I woke up before sunrise with a clarity that felt almost physical. Not calm exactly, but sharpened. Like my senses had recalibrated overnight. I lay there listening to Daniel breathe beside me and realized something simple and terrifying. He was not reacting to our marriage. He was executing a strategy. For the first time, I stopped wondering how to fix us and started wondering how to protect myself. I didn't confront him, not about the hidden account, not about the parenting plan draft. I knew instinctively that if I tipped my hand without a plan, he would just pivot. Daniel was good at pivoting. He'd been building this quietly for months, maybe longer. Instead, I started documenting. Every comment from Teresa. Every time Daniel referred to me as overwhelmed or emotional. Every unusual financial transaction I could still see in the joint account. I took photos of statements. I forwarded documents to a new private email I created from my phone in the Target parking lot on my lunch break. At work, Rachel noticed I'd grown quieter. "You okay?" she asked, leaning against my cubicle wall. "I'm just tired," I replied. She studied me a beat too long. "You know I'm here if you need to vent." I nodded, but something had shifted there too. A subtle awareness that I had perhaps shared too much before. That information, once released, doesn't always land where you think it will. 2 weeks later, everything accelerated. It was a Tuesday. Mateo had a spelling test. Daniel left early, saying he had a Houston call. I went into the office mid-morning for a client presentation. Around 1:15 p.m., my phone rang. Hill Country Elementary. "Mrs. Navarro? Your husband picked up Mateo early. He said there was a family emergency." The words hit differently this time. There was no emergency. I knew it with the kind of certainty that bypasses logic. I called Daniel immediately, straight to voicemail. I texted, "What emergency?" No response. I left work without explaining much. My manager started to ask questions, but something in my face must have stopped him. The drive home felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's hands grip the steering wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw it immediately. A moving truck. The garage door was fully open this time. I ran inside. The living room was stripped. The sectional gone. The TV gone. Daniel's framed college diploma removed from the wall. Mateo's bookshelf half empty. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I moved through the house in a blur. Our bedroom closet, Daniel's suit's gone. His dresser empty. Mateo's room, his clothes missing. His favorite stuffed armadillo gone from the bed. And on the kitchen island, beneath the ceramic lemon sugar jar, were the divorce papers. Filed that morning at 9:08 a.m., temporary custody request. Allegations of emotional instability. Claims that I had expressed intent to relocate out of state with the child. I stood there staring at language that felt both foreign and terrifyingly familiar. The relocation reference hit hardest. I had once told Rachel, in frustration, sometimes I just want to move to New Mexico and start over. A throwaway sentence, now framed as intent. I called Daniel again. On the third attempt, he answered, "Stop calling, Elise," he said, voice flat, almost bored. "This is better for Mateo." "Where is he?" I demanded. "He's with me. He's safe. You took him out of school under false pretenses. I did what I had to do." My hand tightened around the phone. "You filed for divorce this morning." "Yes." The simplicity of it stole my breath. "You could have talked to me." "We've tried talking," he replied. "You've been unstable for months." "Unstable. I blocked you," he added. "My attorney will be in touch." The line went dead. I lowered myself to the kitchen floor because my legs refused to hold me. The house echoed around me, hollow, rearranged. I thought about the parenting plan draft, the hidden account, Teresa's repeated use of the word calm, Rachel's questions about whether I'd ever considered starting fresh somewhere else. The pieces locked together with sickening precision. This hadn't been a last-minute decision. This was coordinated. The narrative had been laid down carefully, me as emotional, overwhelmed, volatile, Daniel as steady, proactive, protective. And the most terrifying part, I had unknowingly helped them shape it by venting my fears out loud. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time, long enough for the afternoon light to shift across the tile, long enough for the reality to settle into my bones. Then I did the one thing I should have done weeks earlier. I called Camila. "He filed," I said when she answered. Silence. "And he took Mateo." Her voice changed instantly, sharp, focused. "Don't touch anything. I'm coming over." For the first time since I'd found the credit union statement, I didn't feel confused. I felt awake. Daniel may have been executing a plan, but he had underestimated one thing. He thought I was still asleep. Camila arrived within 40 minutes, still in her work slacks and low heels, legal pad already in hand. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She walked straight to the island, read the first page of the petition, and said, "Good." He showed his hand. Good. That word steadied me more than sympathy ever could. "Don't move anything," she repeated. "We document exactly how you found the house." We took photos of the empty living room, the stripped closets, Mateo's half-cleared bookshelf, the garage with oil stains where Daniel's SUV had been. Camila dictated, I wrote. Timestamps, condition of property, exact wording from the petition. Then she looked at me and asked the question that mattered. "What do you have?" I told her about the Lone Star Credit Union account, the salary discrepancy, the draft parenting plan I'd found in his drawer, Teresa's repeated comments about me being overwhelmed. The way Daniel had been telling neighbors I was stressed. Camila's jaw tightened. "Okay," she said. "That's coordination." The next morning, we met with a family law attorney she'd worked with before, Laura Benitez, late 50s, direct, no performative warmth. Her office walls were lined with framed certifications and photos of 2 grown daughters in graduation gowns. She read the petition once without expression. "Classic preemptive narrative framing," she said calmly. "He's positioning you as unstable to justify temporary custody." My stomach flipped. "Can he do that?" I asked. "He can try," she replied. "But narrative isn't evidence." I handed her copies of the credit union statement and the salary breakdown I'd pieced together from deposit amounts. Laura's eyebrow lifted slightly. "He failed to disclose this?" "He told me he made $82,000, I said. "He makes 96. "And the account?" "Hidden." She leaned back in her chair. "That's not instability. That's financial misconduct." For the first time since the school had called, I felt something other than fear. Strategy. Laura filed an emergency response that afternoon, requesting immediate temporary custody restoration and a financial audit. She subpoenaed Daniel's employer for verified salary records. She requested disclosure of all accounts under his name. And then we waited. The first hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. In those 2 weeks, I learned how quietly rumors travel. A neighbor texted asking if I was okay. A coworker mentioned hearing I was taking time off to focus on myself. Rachel stopped initiating lunch. It didn't take long for the source of those whispers to become clear. Laura received discovery materials 3 days before the hearing, Daniel's affidavit. In it, he described me as increasingly emotional, prone to erratic statements, and recently expressing desire to relocate out of state. The relocation line was highlighted. "Did you say this?" Laura asked. "Once," I admitted, in frustration, to a coworker. She nodded slowly. "And that coworker?" "Rachel." Laura didn't look surprised. "Expect her to be called as a character witness if this escalates." The day of the hearing, I wore a navy blazer Camila found at a consignment shop. $14. It fit like armor. Daniel sat across the courtroom in a new suit. Teresa behind him, posture rigid. His attorney went first, painted him as the stable provider acting in the child's best interest, suggested I had become overwhelmed balancing career and motherhood, used words like volatility and unpredictability. Then Laura stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She introduced Exhibit A, Lone Star Credit Union account statement, $31,540 undisclosed. Exhibit B, employer salary verification, $96,000 annual compensation versus the $82,000 declared in marital discussions. Exhibit C, draft parenting plan dated 3 weeks prior to filing. Exhibit D, text messages between Daniel and Teresa, obtained through subpoena after Laura learned Teresa had assisted in securing his new apartment lease, referencing keeping Elise framed as overwhelmed. The courtroom shifted. Daniel's composure cracked first in his jaw, then in the way he avoided eye contact. The judge leaned forward slightly while reading the income discrepancy. "Mr. Navarro," she said evenly, "why was this account not disclosed?" Daniel glanced at his attorney. Silence stretched. "For privacy," he muttered. "In a marriage," the judge replied. There was no good answer. By the end of the hearing, temporary primary custody was restored to me, pending full review. Daniel was granted structured visitation. A forensic financial review was ordered. Both parties instructed to refrain from disparaging the other in front of the child. Teresa's face was unreadable. When Mateo came home 2 days later, he stood in the doorway holding his backpack tightly. I knelt in front of him. "I didn't leave you," I said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." He studied me for a long moment, searching for cracks. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around my neck. That night, after he fell asleep in his own bed, I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the island, the same butcher block surface that had held divorce papers 2 weeks earlier. It looked the same, but I didn't. For months, Daniel had been constructing a version of me designed to weaken my footing. What he didn't account for was this: I don't crumble when cornered. I document. And this time, the story was going to be written with evidence, not whispers. Life advice? Trust your instincts early, document everything, and never confuse someone's calm tone with good character. Stability isn't what people say, it's what they consistently do. If something feels off, don't organize the pantry, organize the facts. And if you enjoy smart comebacks, courtroom karma, and strategic glow-ups, subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel and drop a comment. We read them all.